All right, guys, let's take a look at standing rear body locks. So again, you might be looking at this and being like, is Craig teaching wrestling? And I'm going to have to teach wrestling, but to highlight the differences between jiu-jitsu or submission grappling, what we do, and wrestling. Because again, there's limitations of what we can steal from wrestling and bring to jiu-jitsu. Because, for example, wrestlers like 5-point throwers, they like lifting. So if I were to lift, I probably only got about 2 lifts in me, especially over the course of a 20, 30, 40-minute match. I'm not going to be able to keep lifting someone up, returning them to the mat. Wrestlers can do that because they have short matches. They have rests in between. They have rounds, right? So I'm going to try to highlight what would happen if wrestlers did their style of escapes, what are high percentage moves in the jiu-jitsu context, because again, jiu-jitsu guys are going to react differently to wrestlers when we take a rear body lock, right? So let's try to have a look at what would be a common wrestling escape from the rear body lock. So I've landed with a rear body lock on Placido. A lot of wrestlers will focus on stripping these grips, and that'll mean they'll start pushing and getting their hips low to the ground, trying to open my hands, and they potentially turn back in to attack you, right? But if you look at the way Placido does that, I'll hold his body weight up, but he basically keeps his shoulders in line, and he starts walking here to strip the grip. But if we were to do that in jiu-jitsu, we can easily do something like a crab ride, or even like you would have seen Marcelo Garcia do it back in the day. He basically jumps into the back of the knees. So I'll try to be gentle with Placido here. But if he starts getting too low, we can easily pull a crab ride here. And obviously, now we're beginning to get to some of the best positions in jiu-jitsu. So again, if someone's going to sit like that in wrestling, wrestlers aren't going to fall with their back and take a couple of crab ride hooks like that. Or even really, if we could do it exaggerated, rather than crab, I could just kick Placido's legs. Because again, if I fall flat to my back, that's going to be points in wrestling. So things like that are going to be very different as well. Lifting someone in jiu-jitsu is much harder because Placido has leg attacks from here. If I step too close and he grabs both legs, I can't lift him. And if he rolls forward into the legs, he's going to get great attacks. So we have to be very careful there. So when we're talking about jiu-jitsu, if I want to lift someone, I have to bring my legs close. Even if I do lift Placido, it's going to be fatiguing for me. It's also going to be dangerous. In wrestling, there's not as many counterattacks a wrestler could hit from you as jiu-jitsu. A wrestler in a rear body lock isn't necessarily going to potentially finish the match at the drop of a hat. But if I am neglectful in my positioning and I just come in, Placido could end this match immediately with a leg attack. Or he could grab both legs and step behind. Take me backwards like this. So within the context of jiu-jitsu, Placido could end this match if I'm neglectful in this position. So they're going to be different things. So again, I want to emphasize this. Placido starts doing his escape where he's getting low and walking away. I would just jump back in to both of his legs and be able to secure very strong positions from him. So you're going to see jiu-jitsu guys have a different approach when they get rear body locks. And that's kind of what I want to show from here. And especially with jiu-jitsu guys, we're going to often be competing shirtless. They're going to be even slipperier than wrestling. So we have to try things different. We have to do things different in the context of a long match to save our energy from these positions and also be aware of the submissions they could land from being in a bad position onto us. All right, guys, let's talk about the most basic thing we can do from this position, and that is a knee block go soda. So what I want you to visualize with this is a lot of people just think they're throwing them and placing a knee in front so they have to post their hands on the mat. But really, it's a knee block go soda, right? So we want to do it, we want to force Placido to move in such a way that he has to step on the leg we're blocking. And when we block that knee, where he would ordinarily step to recover his balance, when I connect my hands back here and I put weight on this hip and I walk into this hip, he steps to save his balance, right? So we're trying to make him step. But instead of allowing him to step, we block the knee. And that's what causes Placido to post his hands on the hip. So I'm bringing both hands close to the hip and I'm putting weights onto his hip with my forearm. And then I place the knee in front. Placido cannot step and we're able to get his hands to the mat. So that's the drill I want you to think about. First, I want you to be able to position yourself in such a way that you make them step. So when we come behind them, it's not going to be as easy for me to make Placido step with my hands in front or even just running past. I want to place those hands close to the hip and bring my head on that side of his body. And you can see there's a lot of pressure in his hips already. The way he's standing, we're loading him up. We block that knee and we can drive their hands to the floor. So super, super basic, but you have to do it well. And again, this one is low percentage, unless guys are very experienced from there. It's low percentage when you go for it in and of its own right, but it's high percentage when we hit it in amongst other movements. But again, before you get the hands to the floor, you need to be able to make them step. And when we can make them step, we can block that step and force your opponent, training partner, into a 4-point position. So one more time, the side we want to take him is the side we bring our hands. We put weight onto that hip. Then I block the knee and we get him down to the hands. That is a knee block Kosoto. All right, guys. So we're going to be covering the Kosoto, which is basically a blocking action, right? The Kosoto is going to work very, very well in terms of incorporating it with a knee block Kosoto. So we'll start with that, right? So let's look at what a Kosoto is and how it fits in with a knee block Kosoto. So for the regular Kosoto here, I'm behind Placido. I'm going to step in line with his feet, but I'm going to face where I want to trip him. So we step in line and I face my foot where I want to trip him. And I use the base of my foot to block this foot as I pull him over the top. So it's unlikely I'm going to take Placido down with this, but it is likely I'm going to get a good reaction, whether that be he widens his stance or he lifts his arms up to balance, right? Very, very common off of a Kosoto is if Placido's in a defensive position, it can be very difficult to step in for a knee block Kosoto. Placido will block my leg. I might switch to the other side. He blocks my leg. He's patient here, right? So we need to move these hands. Obviously, I'm not going to let go and try to make space. I'm going to lose him completely. We need to make his hands move without letting go of the body lock. So we can do that through the use of a Kosoto. Watch what happens. And we can get our knee in front and then drive their hands to the floor. So when you drill this with your partner, right, I want you to first develop a strong reaction so that we develop a strong reaction by just drilling a basic Kosoto. So step in, block. Don't think of it so much as you're kicking him. You're blocking his foot to pull him over. Obviously, Kosoto is a blocking action. So we just want to pull him in such a way that he has to take a step. But then we just don't allow him to take that step because we are hitting a blocking motion. The longer we can stick to his foot, the more chance of him going down. But again, realistically, we're dealing with athletes with the balance. Placido's going to get his balance back. So we use this action mostly. We use a regular Kosoto to get a knee block Kosoto. So as I do this, his arms come up and I can place my knee in front. Because again, if we just go for a regular knee block Kosoto out of a static position, Placido is generally way ahead of me. He's going to be blocking that leg. Run to the other side, he blocks that leg. So we get the hands out of the way and we bump them down. Generally speaking, from a static position, that's how we're going to get a knee block Kosoto. Obviously, it's a different thing if we've had a scramble and I get to the back and before he has a chance, I'm already knee blocking that leg. But again, if he has a chance to get his balance, settle in, block, we need to get his hands moving, and we do that with a regular Kosoda. Another great position to hit the Kosoda, it's probably the most powerful one, is when a common reaction, we leave our head in the wrong spot, is Placido takes a whizzer. And you can see with my positioning here, I'm going to be very vulnerable. I could get thrown here, right? So going for a whizzer defensively, very strong, very smart. Typically speaking, a whizzer would prevent me taking the back. If I'm circling around and he has a whizzer, I lose my ability to take the back. If he doesn't have a whizzer, we move behind. So it can prevent you getting your back taken. It can also save you when someone has your back. If I'm too wide and he takes it, now he's prevented me maintaining the back. So it's a prevention and escape. But if you know your opponent likes to use the whizzer, as he reaches back and we hit the block, typically speaking, you get a very strong reaction because they are throwing their body weight back. We can just pull them to the floor. This one's very, very high percentage. So we're leaving our head too close. Placido starts going, and we can take him down. And I would say in terms of a regular Kosoda, this is the time where it can be translated into a proper mat return. But generally speaking, if your opponent's being conservative, you're only going to get maybe hands to the floor, hands in the air. But if they try to whizzer you when you have control over their back, you're going to get a huge mat return. All right, guys, let's look at a move called Jiashi Haraya, which is like a sweeping motion where we bring 2 feet together, right? So a common response in jiu-jitsu, especially because of the nature of IBJJF events, is guys get to a bad position and they start looking for the boundary, the edge of the match for a reset. Although in wrestling we have push-out rules. Sorry, I should say they have push-out rules. Guys try to avoid the edge of the match. In jiu-jitsu guys will look for the edge of the match. So a good example of this in competition would be Gordon Ryan against Patrick Gaudio. Patrick Gaudio was walking away, whether that be to escape or maybe looking for a reset at the edge of the mats. Gordon hits this, able to hit a mat return and basically finish the match from there with a point scoring position. So let's look at it, right? When Placido walks forward, we need to try to mirror his stance. So as he goes for it, 1, 2, 3, and then we catch that third step. But we want to mirror the stance because if Placido walks right, I walk left. It's very hard for me to kick his foot when it comes off the ground. So what I try to time is as Placido walks and it comes off the ground, we sweep his feet together. So we're trying to mirror the stance so that it's easy for me to sweep the foot mid-air. If you don't do that, obviously, you're probably going to realistically be just kicking guys in the ankles, which, I mean, depending on who your opponent is, that might be preferable or not, right? Another small detail, again, depends how kind you are to your training partners. You really should try to hit with the base of your foot. But again, if you're training with someone like Placido, you might really be aiming for the shin kick to the ankle. But again, so we want to mirror stance. So we wait for a sec, we see which one goes forward. 1, 2, 3. And if we catch it just right, we should elevate him enough to hopefully get to total. But what's realistic, especially when people start to anticipate this response, is we probably just get their hands to the floor. Even still, we've improved our position. Obviously, just like we did with the front head series, Placido's ability to defend decreases as we bring him closer to the mat. So this one is Jiashi Haraya. And again, if you want to see a perfect example, Gordon Ryan versus Patrick Gaudio. All right, guys, let's look at a move called the reverse taitoshi. So the reverse taitoshi is going to work excellent if your posture has, if your training partner's posture is high, right? So if you look at Placido's posture when he's upright, his center of gravity is narrow. It's going to be easier to pull him backwards. If his posture is forward, now it's going to be more difficult, but not impossible to hit a reverse taitoshi. I just want you to think that his weight is further forward, so we have to pull him back harder. And just like in the second example there, the way we did build momentum to hit a taitoshi when someone's leant forward is with momentum. We run, switch to the other side. So let's talk about how to do a basic taitoshi. So the first example, Placido's posture is upright. Again, probably pretty rare, but this is the base we build from to hit the taitoshi. And we also have to do it because people do make mistakes. Even high-level guys, jiu-jitsu guys, in environments like this, rear body lock style environments, can make simple mistakes. So we want to take our reverse body lock reps, right? And the trick to the reverse taitoshi is I don't do it on the same side my head is on. It's going to be much harder to build even a little bit of momentum here. My head is on Placido's right side. I switch sides to hit the taitoshi. So my head comes cross body. And what we're going to do with our legs is I'm going to drop to a knee and I'm going to block his secondary leg with my extended leg. So I'm going to be pulling like this. And I'm going to pull him over this leg that's behind it. So all it is basically, just think you create an artificial block behind him and you're pulling them over. So it's a pushing motion, but I'm pulling his hips over the artificial block behind. When I do it, I'm stepping out and all in one motion. I drop my knee to point the direction I'm pulling him, and my other leg is extended here. If I have my leg bent, it's going to be harder to get distance. So we land knee facing, and I'm pulling Placido over the top. You can see his base is compromised here. So again, we've got our body lock rep. I'm gonna hop and turn, knee drop the direction we're pulling him. And we pull him over the top. And to immediately keep him here, let's get some body weight on top of him here. Here, Placido is probably gonna explode back up. If he pulls back down, we're gonna get some weight on top of him here. So even if he does get up, it's gonna require more energy to do so. So let's look at another circumstance. Placido has even better posture here. He's bent forward. Here, again, size discrepancy, me and Placido. It's realistic I still get him here, especially with the element of surprise. But Placido's aware, and he was a similar size to me. It's going to be hard for me here, especially with good balance Placido has, to just drop and pull. What we can do to build momentum is just to start running. So now Placido's feet are light, and then we immediately drop to the opposite side to pull him into a reverse taitoshi. So we're basically using momentum to get him moving here. So again, just a summary, Placido's posture is high, feel free to go for it, but just make sure that you don't drop to the same side, we drop to the other side. If Placido's got better posture, he's more experienced, we need some momentum, just start running and switch side. And we can immediately get on top to ensure you either A, keep the position, or at least make him expend energy to get back up. All right, guys, I got to give credit to that little bastard Nicky Ryan for this. But this is a Nicky Ryan technique, and he's a big fan of the reverse taitoshi. But of course, when people anticipate the reverse taitoshi, if they time it right, they can step out. So let's take a look at that as a counter. So when I drop here, if Placido either anticipates the move or moves quick, he can step out. But when he steps out, he's going to jeopardize his base backwards. So you can see his hips are behind his ankles. That means he's vulnerable to moving straight back. So we come back. Placido's in his stance, regular stance before I hit a taitoshi. If I were to push him back here, his balance is pretty good. Placido, his butt is back. You can see how quickly he's going to fall back. So I want you to visualize that. When someone goes for a taitoshi, your base is pretty good. But when you step, now you've got this vulnerability where it's going to be easy to sink backwards, because the further your butt is back from your feet, the harder it is to take a step. My hips are above my feet, I can step far. If my butt is back, it's very hard to take counterbalance steps. So if we look at it again, we come through, we hit our reverse taitoshi. When Placido steps out, you can see he's in such a position, especially I'm pulling down on his hips. There's weight into his hips. So we can slide into the floor to take and start securing the back. So it's just a minor thing, but again, if you start hitting reverse taitoshis regularly, guys start anticipating it, they're gonna have movements like that. That movement wasn't developed in isolation. Someone had to have been hit with a reverse taitoshi many times to be able to hit that perfect timing of a step out. But of course, you can't make any movement without leaving a particular vulnerability. So as Placido steps out of the taitoshi, he's vulnerable to falling backwards. So when we attempt this taitoshi and they step out, we can slide to the floor and insert crab hooks. Again, something you probably wouldn't typically see in wrestling, because if I were to mess that up and pin myself and get my shoulders to the floor, I'm going to lose points and give my opponent points. So these are things that have been developed through the use of the combination of jiu-jitsu and wrestling. All right, guys, so let's take a look at how we could return an opponent to the floor with a single crab hook. So something I want you to think about is, we're going to switch roles here just because obviously I'm bigger than Placido. But if Placido dives with 2 crab hooks in, what happens is, if you dive and fall back, he momentarily puts his back on the floor, and I can sometimes have the hip height advantage here. Ideally, he wanted me to land here. But because of the size difference, I could potentially land it on top, and we could have scrambles from here that he might not win, right? So if you're not feeling so inclined to take such a big risk, and again, there are times and places for those risks, we need things to happen. You can use a single crab and hop in such a way to interfere with his balance. And instead of you dropping to a butt, you are actually going to drop to a knee. So that way, when their hips hit the floor, you remain higher than them. And of course, whoever's hips and head is higher in the scramble generally wins the scramble, which again is why you can see Placido diving with double crab hooks and I landed on top. I'm still in the game. I still have a chance, a pretty good chance of winning that scramble and Placido ending up in bottom position. So let's take a look at it. We got our rear body lock. What we're gonna do is we're gonna jump for a crab hook. And the secret to a crab hook is actually not to make it too high in the knee here. this is actually going to be pretty weak. I want to go below the knee and turn my knee in. And that's what's going to allow me to start interfering with Placido's balance here. So we basically want to eliminate this leg and hop in such a way that he would have to take a step with this leg. So when I hop backwards, he has to walk with those legs. He has to walk to keep his balance. So if we throw a crab hook here, he's not going to be able to hop on that leg to correct his balance. And when we push him far enough, he's going to fall from that point. So we secure our body lock and our crab hook. Again, not too high on the knee. That's actually going to slip off. We want to slide past the knee and turn our knee in. And then I hop and put weight in to the opposite hip. And you can see we start taking him down. What I did there was an exaggerated example to demonstrate how he's going to not be able to hop to correct his balance. Realistically, I'm going to probably hop once, twice, and on the third time, I'm going to dive to this knee. So that way, there's going to be a full bodyweight commitment on my behalf to bringing him down, but I'm dropping to a knee, not a hip. Drop to a hip and he drops to a hip, it could end up being a neutral scrabble. So we got our crab hook, hop, hop, and we drop to a knee here. And you can see we land in really good position. We land with head and hip height above our opponent. Could potentially take the crossbody grip here or dive straight for a seatbelt. Something I will say is you want to be careful with your training partners here. The way I landed, Placido's knee pointed out, and you can see that his knee relieved the pressure. If Placido forced his knee to the sky and his hips are up here, especially because he's on one hip and his ankle's wedged against the ground, I might actually land on top of his knee here. That's going to be knee bar pressure. So if you guys drill this with your training partner, tell them not to fight it too hard. Once they're going down, turn the knee out to relieve the pressure to avoid really having, that would be a catastrophic injury, hyperextension of the knee. So again, a great one when you want to get someone down, but you don't want to commit your full body weight below them. Crab hook, and we bring him down. You see Placido's turned his knee, that's perfect. And again, I don't want to stay low here. I want to get above Placido. So that way, if he starts fighting back to his feet, carrying my body weight, and we can secure the rear body lock very easy. So as soon as you put someone down, get your head above their head and make sure you maintain the position or at least body weight pressure with that. Are you okay?
I mean, relatively.
All right, guys, let's talk about the side lift here, right? So for the side lift, it's not like, I want you to think about lifting with good form for any sort of lift in the gym, right? We want to get our hips underneath. So I'm not going to come around Placido's side and start lifting out here. It's going to be all on my back. I'm going to step. I'm going to throw my hips at him to get my hips underneath. And as I lift Placido, to ensure that we get him moving forwards onto the hands, I'm going to lift and bring my knee up. So we lift in and I place my knee in front. Basically like a knee block cosada, but in the air. So even Placido could lift me if he gets his hips inside.
So then I hit that?
Yep. So I had to help him there, but even Placido could lift someone bigger, right? But even me against someone like Placido, if I'm lifted with poor form, just trying to get his weight up there, probably going to injure my back or at least very much fatigue me. I'm going to be able to lift Placido many more times as long as my hips get underneath and I'm lifting with my legs and hips. And then that's just the icing on the cake to lift the knee, to send his knees one way and his upper body the other way. So we run around to the side. I'm going to lift with my hips. I'm throwing my hips in. Obviously, we're being careful. I don't want to throw my hips in and injure his knee. but I'm lifting with my hips. I throw my hips in and I lift with my knee. And we can get their hands to the floor. So we come around to the other side. And we get them to the floor. So again, it's a pretty basic lift, but really what's likely, Placido ends up in a 4-point position. That's really the goal. Depending on how much you dislike your training partner, will relate to how hard you're gonna lift them and turn them. But really the goal is we get them to a 4-point position, which is easier to control them from, easier to progress our positions. All right, guys, so we covered the side lift. Now we're going to be talking about the rear lift. Again, I don't want to emphasize these lifts because you're going to fatigue yourself if you have a long match, right? So a rear lift is great when Placido's posture is forward. When his posture is up. The more forward his posture is, obviously, the harder it's going to be to lift that, and it's going to look very awkward. Versus Placido's posture is upright. It's going to be much easier to get our hips underneath and lift. And what we want to do in the air is the direction I want his hands to go is the direction my elbows turn. So I don't want to just lift Placido and he comes back to where he was. I'm going to use my elbows when his feet are off the ground to push him to the floor. And again, you want to use your hips, right? So we're coming in and just throw your hips into him. We're lifting with the hips, not with the back. So even Placido would be able to lift me from here. Even a couple times. So even a smaller person against a bigger person, if they're lifting with their hips, they're going to be able to lift you, right? That's what's key here is, again, I don't want to be encouraging back injuries. So really, we want to be lifting with our hips and steering the upper body to the floor so that we get 4-point positions. Because ultimately we want to get him here, realistic is probably 4-point. This is where we want to get him with that lift. So don't aim too high, too far. It's going to be exhausting. We really just want to get their hands to the floor.